Joining us now on ICANN Media is Yvonne Thompson, and you're with Change Innovators, Inc. Tell us a little bit about the session you just had here in Banff.
Oh, it was great fun. We were talking about leading self and looking at leadership as it relates to reducing incident rates, connecting corporate leadership to safety leadership, because we continuously want to separate them when they're really should be together. And the focus of the discussion was really around stop kind of getting into everyone else's business, and maybe if we can train and work with leaders to go inside and lead from the inside out, that we might actually be able to connect to our employees in a more meaningful way.
Okay, so I have to say, I found it quite abstract. And I'm looking at, and you know what, I'm 54, yeah. And so I was brought up a certain way and taught a certain way by employers. It is very different now for today's generation coming in. It may seem like a simple question, how does the leadership that you try to teach play a role when it comes to safety in the oil and gas industry?
I think it's all connected. I think what we want to do is separate it, and it's not separated. The fact of the matter is, our frontline employees have really good answers. We just don't ask them the questions. We tell. We give them the answers. We expect them to do what they're told. And that's the style that we've had for the last 100 years. Unfortunately, it's not working well anymore. And our younger generation is desperately trying to be engaged in a more meaningful way. And so it's absolutely connected. When a leader is very intentional and deliberate in their approach, when they approach an employee and instead of telling them what they've done wrong or they ask great questions, takes a little bit more time in the beginning. However, the rewards are huge because now you're getting the employee to think. We've trained employees not to think. We've trained them to do what they're told. We need to tap into their intellect, tap into their abilities by asking great questions. And I'm surprised everywhere I go that when a leader practices this stuff, all of a sudden the employees start to answer really good questions. So now they're thinking. So imagine every employee in the plant actually thinking all the time about what's the best thing to do in this case, what would my leader want me to do, what would my organization want me to do. That's going to reduce incident rates.
So one of the things that you hear when it comes to companies today, or I've heard anyways, and it goes back to the thinking that you're making reference to, is that today's youth, either they focus on one task and everything else has to be explained to them, or they don't have that individual thought. And you think that that's part of the culture as opposed to their inadequacies.
Absolutely. Hey, listen, we work with employers all the time who say, this generation isn't loyal, they're not committed, they're not. And I always say to the employer, because they'll say things like, well, they stay for a few weeks or a month and then they leave. I'm like, okay, have you ever thought about asking yourself why they might leave your company? They're not, they leave the company. They're leaving their supervisor. So they're not. They're very capable. We just haven't. I think it's really sad when we label a generation as being not committed, not loyal, and maybe even individuals that they don't want to think or make decisions. I think we just have stopped asking them. We have not asked them questions for a very long time, and so it's a skill they don't know anymore. It's a skill that they don't have, and so our job is to bring that skill back up.
Employee involvement is important, obviously, in safety. If you've got this gap between leadership and employees, how do you get them involved on the safety aspect?
How do you get the frontline employees involved? You know what? Unfortunately, you can. There's a couple of creative ways you could do it, but really, you got to have the leaders involved. You got to have the leaders leading from the inside out, and having them believe that the employees want to make a difference. Believe that the employees are smart enough to make some good decisions and to be engaged in the leadership in the safety program. And so the idea is that you stimulate that process through the employees. So the leaders are at the core of it.
One of the things you asked is who manages you best. Explain that concept to us.
Well, I ask that question to every audience. It doesn't matter how many people are there. There can be 30, there can be 3,000. The fact of the matter is when we ask the question, who manages you best, everyone has the same answer. And the answer is they do. So why do we think our employees are any different? Why do we have this sense that we manage ourselves best, but our employees can't do that? They're not capable. That makes no sense. We're all human beings, no matter where we come from. The problem is we haven't tapped into that innate ability that our frontline employees have. The leader's job is to figure it out for themselves first and then tap into that into the employee. Yes, it takes a bit more time in the beginning, but the rewards are huge because now they have employees that are actually engaged, they're thinking, they're critical thinking, they're looking at situations from a different angle. So we have to allow them an opportunity to manage themselves. That doesn't mean you flick a switch and tomorrow say, it's just chaos, we'll let everybody do what they want to do. Right. But through good leadership development, we train our leaders to engage them in a way that can work.
Right. Well, because you're not saying get rid of structure.
No, absolutely not. And I'm certainly not suggesting we get rid of left brain process and all the things that make us efficient. Here's the real deal. And I got asked this question earlier, right? Leaders, particularly CEOs, especially if they're senior in years, so if they're in their late 50s and into their 60s, they rely very heavily on the left brain process. It's not because they don't have right brain and heart center, it's because they've been trained to use that left brain. Stepping over into the right brain and heart center is very prickly for them. And so they struggle doing it. But what we don't want to ever lose sight of is it's kind of like a toolbox. You think about the carpenter's toolbox. I'm only going to pull out the hammer. That's the only thing I'm ever going to pull out. I'm never going to pull out anything else. Mm-hmm. And what we're saying is pull out all the tools you have. Use the left brain, use the right brain, go into the heart center and ask yourself, what's the right thing to do in this situation? Because we intuitively know. And our young people, we're seeing much more intuitive individuals. They have a skill set that they are willing to explore, but their leaders aren't. And so that's the piece. It's why would you go into the toolbox and only take out the hammer? That makes no sense.
So is it a question that today's youth maybe do things their own way and leadership does, like, there's a fault on both sides, or is it not everybody's made to be a leader either, obviously?
I think everyone's a leader of themselves. Yeah. I don't know that I think that's a big question. I'd have to really reflect on a little bit more as to, should everyone be in a leadership role? I don't think so. I think there's people that love being a great engineer, and they want to manage projects, but they don't want to lead big teams of people. If their passion is in highly technical engineering, that's where they should stay. So I don't think that everyone should be in a leadership role, but I do believe that engineer can absolutely lead himself. So as he's interacting with contractors and vendors and other people on the project team, they're actually leading from a place that engages everybody on the team.
Okay, last question for you. If you are a frontline worker and you don't have a good leader, what do you do then?
Well, we get asked that question all the time. My manager is a micromanager. He's driving me crazy. I can't move in any direction with it. And you're going to think the answer is really weird, but we tell them, go home and write down everything your boss does really, really well. And they look at me and say, oh, I just told you, my boss is a da-da-da-da-da-da. Go home and write down everything. And every night you got to find one new thing that your boss does really well, and you got to write it down. What we want the employee to do is get perspective. You cannot make good decisions when you don't have perspective. When you are angry, when you have negative thoughts and negative feelings, your decisions will never be good. So once we can get perspective and we understand that our boss does do some things really well, does other things I don't like much, but he does some things really well, now I can get some balance and some perspective. And as I get balance and perspective, I can change what I'm thinking about. And as I change what I'm thinking about, I'll change how I feel about going to work. We want people to go to work feeling great and feeling good about what they do. And so it all starts with what we think about. So if we can get them to shift that piece, now they at least might be able to make some better decisions. Is it me? Do I need to move on to a different organization? Or maybe I just need to change what I think about, and then I can adapt better into my work environment.
And of course, if you've got that way of looking at it, when it comes to health and safety, you're also going to be taking better care of yourself on the site as well.
Absolutely. It's a huge factor in the incident rates, is what people are thinking about. Do they like coming to work? Are they engaged in what they're doing? Or are they negative and stressed and feeling like, that this is drudgery? Our job at Change Innovators is to bring relief to organizations. That's our primary compelling purpose, is to provide relief to individual employees so that they can make better decisions and be better, highly productive for their organizations and less at risk.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.